Hey there, it's Tandy from Common Ground, Alaska. I wanted to pop in here today and share a story with you that I think is really, really important for everyone who does any type of canning to hear, whether you're a beginner canner or whether you've been canning for a long time. Here's the thing, I've been canning forever and I teach classes on canning safety. And yet I was involved in a canning accident over the holiday season that, well, let's just say it kind of shook me up a little. It scared me pretty good. So, um, I want to share what happened and I want to share the reason it happened and I want to help you to never have to deal with this. So, first of all, I'm not new to canning. So, um I canned with my granny, I canned with my mom, I've been canning myself since I've been married. We used to, when we lived in Oregon 30 years ago, I'd canned some of our deer meat. We'd always can peaches. Like I've been canning for years and years. So, um I guess part of what I want to say is no matter how long you've been doing anything, it's always good to kind of check your processes and it's always good to continue learning. But one of the things that I think is really important, if you've been to any of my canning classes, you know, kind of my take on the whole um, rebel canning aspect of things. And I think some of the things I don't particularly do all of my canning through, like, not all of my recipes are USDA approved, but I apply common sense to every recipe that isn't in a way that I know that it's still safe. But I don't like some of the kind of off the rails rebel canning things that people are doing these days, because I think that they put you at a pretty high risk for, I mean, accidents and to get sick and all that. But let me share this. Let me share what happened. So we bought a pig. So I needed to make some room in our freezer for the pig. And so I froze all the backs and the feet and things for our, from our chickens when we butchered our chickens this fall. And they're all in the freezer taking up space. Well, I need to make room for this pig that we were picking up. So I got them all out and I just made these huge batches of bone broth on my wood stove. A friend let me borrow her huge pots. And so I was able to just put a lot of stuff in there. So I had some chicken meat, I had some broth. Things were going along pretty well. So I canned my first batch of broth. Everything went fine, but one jar broke. And I guess let me back up just a tiny little bit. I have been canning on the same stove for 20 years. My mom bought us the stove when we first started building this house, when we first moved up to Alaska, because I was using an old Coleman stove. And she came up in September of that very first year we were building the house. And she said, "You can't make Thanksgiving dinner on a Coleman stove." So she took me shopping and got me the stove. It was a nice stove at the time. And it served its purpose very, very well, but it's 20 years old. And it's just not quite as functional as it was when we first got it. So I just got a brand new stove, and the stove that I got has obviously has 5 burners, has multiple burners. One of the reasons that I love it is it has a 17,000 BTU burner, which my other one wouldn't come anywhere near that. So what I'm used to on my old stove is when I put my jars in my canner, we're just going with pressure canning because that's what I'm talking about today. When I put my jars in my canner, it would take about an hour, 50 minutes to an hour, just for the steam to start shooting up. That's how not great my stove was. So it would take about 50 minutes to an hour to heat up. And so what was happening inside of there was I never had any issues at all whatsoever. The only issue I had was all that propane, right? That I was using just to heat up the canner, because it was such a gradual warm up. I'm sure you can see where I'm going. So the warm up was very gradual in my inside the pressure canner. So then when I put the weight on and bring it up to pressure, we're looking at another 45 minutes to an hour to get it up to 10 pounds of pressure. It was a really long process. So this new stove, the very first time I tried to can on it, I used my power burner, that 17,000 BTU burner, and it started spewing steam in under 10 minutes. And I was like, wow, this is awesome at first, because remember, it's been 20 years since I've had a new stove. And I wasn't really thinking through the process completely. So it heated up in 10 minutes. And then I couldn't keep the pressure. It was, I have an All-American, so it sends off the pressure. So it doesn't get the pressure doesn't get too high. It just sort of jiggle, 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 and makes a bunch of noise. So it was keeping between 11 and 12 pounds of pressure. So I moved it over in the middle of canning, which you're probably not supposed to do, but I was kind of worried because it seemed like it was getting awfully hot. So I very carefully moved it over to a smaller burner partway through. And in the meantime, a jar had broken. That was my first batch. No big deal. That happens. And I learned from that. I thought, okay, so I can't use this really big burner for the pressure canner. That just, even not thinking through it all the way, I still felt like, things are heating up way too fast in there. If I'm breaking jars, something's not right. So then I did a batch of chicken. I had done just pints of it was already cooked chicken, but what had come off of the backs. And I did some of the breast meat in there because we don't eat a lot of breast meat. Unless it's canned or whatever. So I did a batch of just chicken, and I had put some broth in it. There was quite a bit of leftover broth. So, there was a bunch. There's a whole canner's worth of leftover broth, but that's, so when I did that, I still had 2 jars break. And, in a season, I might break 1 or 2 jars. And that's usually just because some of my jars are really old. Some of them belong to my mom or my granny. So I don't really think much about, 1 or 2 broken jars a season because I figure they're old or whatever, but that's 3 in one day. So I decided, well, maybe things need to heat up a little slower. But I was like, well, a broken jar or 2 is not the big deal. So what I actually did was I heated up for the third batch, and this is where the accident happened. In my third batch, I heated up the jars were heated and the broth was heated but not like it wasn't boiling. The jars didn't come out of boiling water. They were just simply heated up. And then I put it on this slower burner, but it's still, I have multiple burners with different, and this was like the second one down. It still was just having a heck of a time staying between 11 and 12 pounds, even on low. This particular burner is a simmer burner. So it either is when you put it on low, and then if you take it one more like little turn, then it actually puts on a completely different like simmer function. So I thought, well, I'll probably end up with 1 more broken jar. I hope not, but whatever. So I just continued. So, because I really didn't want to move my canner. So the next thing I did was I let it go up to pressure, and it did go up to pressure pretty fast, like I said, and then I had a hard time keeping it between, it was about around 11 or 12, and it wasn't getting over pressurized, but it just does the jiggle and hiss thing continually. And that's just annoying to listen to when you're canning all day long. So it got done. I turned it off. I released the pressure. Once the pressure is completely released, I wait till it's completely done. Then I actually have a routine. I keep my little weight in my drawer with my pot holders. And I use a pot holder and I get it out and I put it directly in the drawer because I'm always scared I'm going to lose my weight. So that's just that's what I automatically do. So I did that. No issues. Took the lid off. No issues. I put the lid on the counter behind me. And I went to reach to grab my grabbers and I heard a sound. And here's the thing. If you hear a sound, don't look in your canner. And I looked in my canner, and at the same time, the middle jar, the lid and the ring both flew off of the jar, and the broth came full force into my face. Now, remember, your pressure canner gets up to 240 degrees or beyond. And this broth was just fresh out of the canner, or still in the canner. So the jar itself didn't break, I'm just assuming that there was way too much pressure. And so it got too hot in there. And then the heat fluctuation was way too much. So the lid for the canner flew over my island and landed over by my wood stove in like between the dining room and kitchen. It had so much force behind it. Well, I got hit with the most of the force of the broth. The broth also hit our ceiling, which is vaulted. It got inside the light, which is lovely. It got all over my stainless steel refrigerator, and broth has some grease in it, so that was lovely. And but the majority of it was I just took straight right in the face. So I remember everything. I remember every detail. But I don't know what made me do the things I did. So apparently I closed my eyes and I must have deflected a little bit to the right, because the majority of the burn ended up on the side of my face. But I immediately, I must have closed my eyes, and I remember running to the sink, which is like 4 steps probably, but I had my eyes closed. Like I felt my way there, or felt when I got there. And I immediately turned the water on, and I just was dousing my face with water. And Jean and Abby were in the living room, but they didn't realize anything had happened, because apparently when I scream, I must do that a lot because it doesn't create any alarms. So I was doing it so much that like I'd feel like I needed to breathe, like I'd feel like I was going to drown. So I came up out of the water and I'd breathe for a second, and then I just went right back to it. And I probably did that for a couple minutes. And then I turned around and told Abby and Jean, Jean, I said, I just got hit in the face with boiling water. I need your help. And he came in immediately and got a towel wet and was, putting it on my face. And he said at that point, I'd still never opened my eyes. He said, at that point, can you see? And I said, I don't know. I haven't opened my eyes. And I realized I hadn't since the incident. And I was kind of scared too, but I did. And my eyes were perfectly fine. But the worst burn was right here on my face, right here. And then it also got really bad here. I still have a little splotch here. And then it got kind of here. And then also like got my lip and a little bit on this side, but the majority of it was obviously right here on my face. And I'm thinking this was on the 23rd. Actually, I know it was on the 23rd because that's my parents' anniversary. And I was thinking about my parents quite a bit because my dad just passed away a year and a half ago. And so I was thinking about my mom. And anyway, so this happened on the 23rd. And I just went back to like splashing my face for a little while until Gene said he said, let's just put like a cold washcloth on it. And he gave me a bowl filled with cold water. And I just kept getting the washcloth cold and kept it on my face. About an hour and a half later, I quit that because I could feel like the burn wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. And so, and he asked to look at it and he said, it doesn't look as bad as I expected it to. And it doesn't feel as bad as I expected it to either for taking on the force of, 240-degree broth flat, to the face with no time to cool off. And then he read and he said, oh, sometimes the blistering can take up to 24 hours. Let's keep an eye on it. And I could see fine, which was the incredible part. So anyway, especially since the worst part of the burn was right on my eye. So, long story short, I took some Advil before I went to bed just because I was afraid. I knew it was going to hurt. It didn't really. I slept okay that night. I got up the next morning and it was pretty tender. Like if I'd smile or if I'd like move my eyebrows, I could feel it. And I didn't realize how much I touched my face until I'd feel if I touched. I just didn't do anything with my face that day. I didn't wash my face. I just threw my hair up in a ponytail, didn't shower, didn't do anything. The next day, it hurt so little that I had forgotten about it. And I jumped in the shower and I put my face in the water and that reminded me. But it wasn't horrible. And then 2 days later, I noticed I was flaking like I had a sunburn and all my skin on my cheek here and all of this skin up here, all peeled, right through here, right under my nose, under my eye, that all peeled, but it never blistered. And so we're calling it our Christmas miracle. And I'm certainly not glad it happened because it was really scary, but it's really good sometimes to rethink your processes. And so the whole reason that I wanted to share my story of this, by the way, I kept the jar for a few days, but there was only the jar obviously was full I left the, the rim. I left the proper headspace, but when Jean took the jar actually out of the canner, it was only about a quarter full. That's how much broth, and that's how much force was behind the broth when it came out. So we're assuming a couple things. I definitely first give credit to the Lord. I think the Lord spared me. I think that could have been a really, really bad accident. And just like with my cancer scare earlier this year, like, I don't know why sometimes you just get spared from things. I mean, I've asked the question many times, why did I have cancer and not even know it? And why was it gone before it even really sunk in that I had it? And now it's like I never had it, because it didn't even, I never really got to have it before it was gone, which is fine. But I don't know why people go through things, other than I think that it's good to share with others, just like I did with my cancer story. And if you, let me just say, if you have a mole that looks weird or if it's itchy, go see Dr. Galler in Wasilla. He'll tell you one way or another what it looks like. He's awesome. Just go do it and don't ask questions. But as far as this goes, I definitely thank the Lord for sparing, whatever could have happened. Lots of the burns could have just been so bad. And we kind of call it our Christmas miracle. But I also think the fact that, your automatic reaction, obviously my reaction was to close my eyes. I didn't think about it. I didn't have to think about it. And I didn't think about the splashing water on my face. I just did it. I never gave it a thought. But Gene has said over and over, he said, that really was the smartest thing you could do. Well, yay me. It just was. I think anybody would have done it. Or had you been outside, I think you would have just stuck your face in the snow. I mean, I think the fear of that burn, and to be perfectly honest with you, it hurt. It was tender that night. And it was tender that morning. And then, like I said, when I stuck my face in the hot water of the shower, and I actually had my little scrubby, I use a scrubby, like a loofah on my face. Yeah, that didn't feel all that great, but, cause I'd forgotten about it. But other than that, it was, and looking like a reptile for a couple days while it healed, it was pretty minimal. And I don't know why. But I'm, again, very grateful. And I just wanted to share the story because, so the moral of the story is this. I will be the first to admit that when I went from taking an hour just to get it to start spitting steam, and then you wait for, you let it to where it actually is spewing steam, and then you time for your 10 minutes, and then you put the weight on, and then it takes another hour, 45 minutes to an hour to get to pressure. I mean, one canner was taking me like 5 hours. So when I got my new stove, I was really, and probably most everybody has a much more powerful stove than my old one was. It really was kind of it was a very like base model stove. So when I was like, man, I can get to pressure in 10 minutes, and that was kind of fun. But the truth is, you have to take it slow. So what I've been doing now, and I hope that this is, I'm convinced that this is going to work better. I have my middle burner is just a regular burner. It's still more burner than I used to have, but it takes, I don't remember how long, but it takes a good while for it to heat up inside. And I make sure that it's low enough that we're not pushing the 11 and 12 pounds of pressure. And it's not constantly having to be jiggling and letting steam out, letting pressure out. And, just making sure that it's actually taking its time, because I almost always cold pack things just because there's always people around, and I never can, the jars are hot, the liquid's hot, everything's hot. I'm going to end up burning myself. Ironically, I did things cold, and so I ended up burning myself. But the other kind of best practice that we're going to do, because this stove works so much faster, and I think it does get a little hotter in my pressure canner, is when I take my lid off my pressure canner, I should have brought it over here, but I'm going to just put the lid on just kind of cockeyed for a few minutes, just like you're supposed to do. You're supposed to open your lid and let your water bath rest for 5 minutes, and that helps keep it from siphoning. I'm going to kind of do the same thing with my pressure canner from here on out. similar, only I'm going to have the lid on it. So if something does happen, it's just going to hit that lid. So just kind of put it on just, a little bit off to the side. So steam and, can escape and it can cool off in there, but it's not going to be, I'll probably wait like 10 minutes before I take everything out of the pressure canner. I just think that's let things cool off just a little bit, let everything settle before I am unloading my pressure canner. The crazy thing is I have never heard of this happening before. Never, ever, ever. And I was on an Azure, there's an Azure Standard group that's just Azure Standard customers. And a lady just had the exact same thing happen to her, but she was just starting to use Superb lids. So she thought maybe it had something to do with the lids, which it wouldn't, because mine were ball lids. I'm still using up. When the lids when lids were hard to find, I stocked up so well that I'm still using them, trying to get to, so I can use the Superb. But, she had the same thing happen. And I really do think it's because, or I'm convinced actually that it is because our stoves are just so powerful these days, which is a great thing when you're trying to boil water, but you just can't move things that fast in the world of pressure canning, because everything needs to be able to slowly heat up in order to not break or not, have the lids fly off and liquid get you in the face. So that's my story. And if you have any questions at all whatsoever, you're more than welcome to send me a message or leave a comment here on YouTube. We do ask you to follow us on YouTube, of course, Common Ground Alaska. It helps us if you follow us, and hopefully you'll find lots more useful content. And happy canning. I hope that you'll take all of the safety measures that you can, and so you can just enjoy your time and enjoy the food.